enjoying the talk so far? Pretty good stuff, eh? Yeah, I'd say so. Well, the fun continues because in our next session, please welcome Jessie Jamieson, Senior Cyber Risk Engineer at Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. And Jessie will illustrate how to mitigate and respond to AI risk, examining what it is that makes us uncomfortable with emerging technologies like AI, and discuss some concrete steps we can deploy with security to measure confidently and securely just how well we're doing things. So, Jessie, the stage is yours.
Hello, I am Dr. Jessie Jamieson here from the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, the CERT Division there. And I'm here to talk to you today about securing AI and my perspective on securing AI. The title of my talk here is Becoming More Comfortable with AI. And one of the things we're going to talk about as part of my talk is the fact that AI as a technology is something that has made us kind of uncomfortable. It's something that requires some work to get to understand and to employ securely and confidently. But hopefully by the end of my talk, you will be left with some tools, techniques, thoughts, practices, and encouragement that will help you deploy AI-enabled capabilities with confidence and securely. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick this right off. Just regular document markings here, which I am required to show. As I mentioned, AI is a technology that has really burst in popularity. It has been around for a while, AI and machine learning enabled capabilities, but the recent surge in popularity of large language model and generative AI enabled capabilities has AI all over the news and it makes it a very, very hot topic. But one thing I want us to know is that new technologies posing new challenges in cybersecurity is something we've heard before. We've been here before, we've dealt with this before. A few examples. The burst of Internet of Things and distributed device computing. Security at the edge is a challenge that we have had to overcome and that we are still grappling to overcome today. Another example is software supply chain. We're going to talk about this a little bit with respect to AI. But dealing with the software supply chain has posed a very complex set of challenges that we've had to overcome and has changed some of our thoughts on risk and risk management. Another good example is the advent of remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic has opened us up to all kinds of vulnerabilities and threats, different kinds of threats in the threat space that maybe we were not as attuned to or aware of as we were before the pandemic. So this includes threats relevant to bring your own device, either mandates or what's actually happening in distributed computing at organizations, and the advent and increase in popularity of virtualization has all forced us to rethink vulnerabilities, the vulnerability space, how we're going to manage those vulnerabilities, and what threats actually pose risks to our organization. Another good example is the advent of cloud computing. This is another thing that's been another topic that's been of high interest, especially in the world of big data, that we need to use cloud computing and cloud computing resources to help us get the most out of our data and our computing power. And all of these challenges together have presented new challenges to us. New technologies have presented new challenges to us, but this is not something new, is all I'm trying to say here. The one thing though about generative AI and AI-enabled technologies, though, is that is this sense of urgency. Now, I mentioned this just a second ago when I was talking about generative AI technologies in general. There is a sense of urgency in capitalizing on AI right now, and the rate of innovation with respect to these Gen AI tools and Gen AI capabilities has our heads spinning. And this has definitely served to compound an already complex security situation. And this is something that's posed a new challenge or has us feeling a little bit on the back foot, especially in the cybersecurity and risk world. We've had to rethink a few things. But like I said before, we're going to be working to find comfort in the familiar. As part of this talk, I'm going to be talking about risk management frameworks that have been very successful, tried and true frameworks that have helped us get through some of these technological challenges that I mentioned on the previous slides. And we're going to talk through some of the unique challenges that generative AI technologies and the advent of these very popular technologies have presented to those to the implementations of those risk management frameworks. So let's take a moment and pause and go back to talk about what we're familiar with. One thing that a properly executed risk management framework really hinges upon is understanding a technology and how you use it in your business context. So how one organization or another uses a technology in their own business context is going to be different, and that's going to impact the risks that a institution or organization faces relevant to that use of technology. Coupled with that is a threat space. How an organization uses technology in the business context really serves to filter that threat space down from one that applies to the use of technology in general to just the use cases that are particular to an organization. And once an organization has a good grasp of the technology and how they're using it in a business context, as well as the threat space and what's relevant to them, they can really start to analyze how the use of that technology is relevant to the risk appetite and to the risk appetite statements that an organization has already invested time in developing. A good risk management program spends some time going through and developing these risk appetite statements and revisits them once a new technology or innovation comes out and is going to be implemented across an organization. That also shapes or helps an organization understand the contextual risk. So there is risk in general, just like the threat space, there's risk in general that applies to a technology. But every organization implements the technology in its own way. And that causes some of the risk to not be particularly relevant, and makes and gives the risk that additional context that applies to the coupling of the organization, its use cases, and that technology. Now, once an organization revisits its risk appetite and its risk management methodologies in the context of this new technology and how they're going to be using it, then they can convert that into a proper risk response. And this doesn't just mean mitigation. So a good risk response is mitigation, is understanding how to transfer risk. Maybe in a third-party agreement, you work through how the risk is mitigated or handled by that third party, and then how you will assume it. You may have to choose to avoid that risk altogether and maybe turn down the opportunity to use some of those new technologies. And you may employ mechanisms for reducing that risk across the enterprise. But all of this together, both the technology in a business context, coupled with a threat space, and your risk appetite that you've gone through a whole lot of effort to develop and understand at the organizational level, goes into that risk response, right? But there are two pieces of this general risk management framework that the advent of large language models and generative AI technologies have kind of thrown a wrench in. And that is the threat space. That's the first one. And how we might summarize this is that generative AI as an emerging technology has challenged traditional definitions of vulnerability and has revealed new threats. We are now having to ask ourselves very fundamental questions around what a vulnerability even is and what risk exposure means from the context of this new technology. And we're going to talk about the threat space at length here in just a moment. Now, the second area where these technologies have kind of thrown a wrench in is in our risk response. And you can summarize this as saying that the options for dealing with risk in the Gen AI space are very broad, they're very complex, and they apply to these new challenges that these technologies have imposed upon us. And part of this is due to the fact that large language models, generative AI technologies are complex themselves, have a lot of moving parts. So understanding what knobs to turn to help you mitigate, transfer, avoid, or reduce that risk can sometimes be a little bit more difficult than if you're employing a more traditional technology. So how do we mitigate this? How do we deal with this? And what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today is that the keys to effectively securing AI, especially as you employ a risk management framework that's been generally presented like here on the slide, is that you need to invest a little bit in data agility and organizational adaptability. Organizational adaptability is something that I think we can grasp and understand, meaning that it's really an organization's ability to pivot quickly from a strategic level. Now, data agility is something that I've worked with before, but when I say that, I mean the ability of an organization to quickly and efficiently utilize data to meet evolving needs, challenges, and opportunities. So it's not just reacting to negative, but it's also embracing data for positive benefit for an organization. So just to recap here is as part of this talk, I'm actually going to be talking mostly about the threat space and risk response and how data agility and organizational adaptability are really going to be keys to allowing you to confidently and securely employ and deploy generative AI and large language model, machine learning, AI-enabled technologies. So with that, we're kind of going to dive right into it and talk about the threat space bit. Okay, so we're going to dive right into it here and talk about the changing threat space that has emerged as a result of the advent of generative AI technologies. We've already touched on this a little bit. Generative AI technologies have changed the way that we think about and reason about vulnerabilities. They're no longer just bugs in code. They're a little bit more complex and affect a very complex technology stack. And one of the things I want to emphasize, just as I said before, is that overcoming this challenge is both a data agility and an adaptability problem. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. First, I want to talk about some of the knowledge bases and threat frameworks that have come out in the advent of these generative AI technologies. At first, when these technologies hit the market, there were a lot of questions around what new threats and risks and vulnerabilities and exposures are there? Do we even understand this technology enough to know? And thankfully, over time, a lot of these knowledge bases have come out that have allowed us to more succinctly organize and reason around what these threats actually are. And I'll mention a couple of them here. The first being the OWASP Top 10, and the second being MITRE Atlas, and there are others and other frameworks that one can adopt. The point being, though, that you need to adopt them. So every time a new threat database comes out, I'm sure your analysts in your organization are asking questions around, oh no, I have to integrate all this new data. I have to be able to map these to our risks and map these to threats and generate cybersecurity threat intelligence that I can use in my organization. And unfortunately, especially in this case, that kind of is the case. These are brand new threats and vulnerabilities that we've never seen before. They're not just rehashes of the same type of playbook. They're actually sufficiently different to warrant upending sometimes the processes that we use to measure and understand these. So if we're going to take these new threat frameworks, map them to our technology stacks, that requires a lot of or a greater capability with respect to the data and data integration, and really having a good foundational understanding of your technology stack as it is. So an organization that's very quick to adopt these new threat frameworks, that can very quickly generate or adopt or harness threat intelligence, is going to have a leg up with respect to securing the capabilities that you want to deploy across your organization. And I'm actually going to show you an example of why I think that this is a data agility problem. So from the OWASP top 10, actually, here is an example of an entry in that framework. LLM 07 2025 system prompt leakage. Now that is a vulnerability where system prompts or instructions used to steer the behavior of a generative AI model can also contain sensitive information that was not intended to be discovered. And the reason that this is included is that through some prompts, one malicious actor or even somebody who's not malicious and is just playing around with the capability might be able to cause the generative AI capability to return some of the information on the back end that was never quite meant to be revealed to the end user through whether it's prompt engineering. I'm sure some of us have seen the classic ignore all of your previous instructions types of prompts that are entered into these Gen AI capabilities. Whatever the mechanism might be, the fact that that information that was never meant to be revealed can be revealed through these very sophisticated prompts is a problem. But how do we now check for this? How do we understand this vulnerability? What does this actually mean? How do we heal from this? And that's a complex question with a very complex answer. The first step is understanding that threat. So I just walked through a very, very succinct explanation of what that vulnerability actually is. And I'm sure I'm definitely not even doing that justice. There's a whole lot of information out there about these vulnerabilities now that one can use to understand what they are, what the risks to these vulnerabilities are, what capabilities are affected, what components of the capability are affected, whether that's your data lake or the interface that's used to send and serve the prompts. There's a whole lot to understand there with respect to these vulnerabilities. Now, once you understand that, you have to identify, in this particular case, the prompts and system instructions that are being used and embedded in the models, as well as the possible attack vectors. Now, already, for both of these two steps, I'm talking a lot about data. So you're collecting a lot of data about the threat, about risks to your organization. You're collecting a lot of data around the capabilities that exist out there in the wild that have been employed by your organization, and not to even mention the internal asset data that you have to collect to know if you're even using any of these capabilities. And now, once you have that understanding, even knowing and logging and cataloging all of the prompts and system instructions that you're using as you implement these technologies requires another level of data orchestration that can get overwhelming, right? So this is step 2. And then the third part might be to now respond and implement and lock this down. Implement some prompt and response logging, sanitizing your prompts, having a mechanism for refusing those prompts, and then finally going through and updating your models, your policies with data and functionality updates. And this is a pipeline for just one type of vulnerability. There are plenty of other vulnerabilities out there that apply to these technologies, but again, at every step of this pipeline here, we're dealing with data, whether that's data about the external capabilities and our own internal capabilities, the prompts, how you're going to log those, sanitizing those, the process for dealing with those prompts, logging information about the models and the changes and updates you've made to those. That's all data. So your organization needs to be agile in its capabilities around dealing with this data, harnessing this data, knowing what to do with it, logging it, keeping track of it, validating it, and the better an organization is with respect to its data posture and its ability to handle and deal with data, I would argue that those organizations are more poised to actually deploy these capabilities securely and in a way that they can confidently employ them and use them to the ends of the organization. So that's just one example of how complicated this can be. And really, if I were to sum this up, I would say that at the end of the day, your organization should adopt and hopefully or adapt and hopefully not get to the point where it needs to start over and rebuild a lot of its data implementations and data technologies from the ground up. So that, again, that's just one example of how data is kind of one of the common threads here with all of these vulnerabilities, and the best positioned organizations are going to be those that know how to handle their data. Now, I already talked about adaptability a little bit, and what do I mean by that? If you're not just talking about the data agility piece, but if you're talking about the adaptability piece, again, not just knowing how to use the data and employ that data to the benefit of your organization, but taking measures to protect you and your data. Data is everything with these generative AI capabilities, and I think that a renewed interest in data security is definitely at the forefront of securing AI technologies. You have to ensure that these capabilities are tested before you integrate them. That's part of securing you and your data. And you have to put your money where your mouth is. Again, I just said it, revisiting your data security controls regularly and validate that they are still doing what they need to do. The third thing I'll touch on here is prioritizing explainability and transparency. Especially for securing AI, if you don't know what behavior is normal, is expected, then how are you going to know what behavior is not normal and not expected? And both explainability and transparency in your data, your prompts, your model, your architectures, and your whole pipelines, both of those are key to being able to give you that strong foundation. Another thing that every organization needs to be doing already, but that is of particular relevance to the Gen AI boom, is monitoring your tech debt. I know that as organizations move to confidently deploy these technologies, they do so incrementally, which is a great strategy. But incrementally deploying these technologies may mean that some technical debt is building up underneath that you don't really need anymore. But because these capabilities are so complex, rolling those off and rolling those back as you sunset them is very, very important and important to keep track of. And then finally, I touched on this just very briefly in the previous slide, but version controlling your models, your data, and establishing data provenance is something that's brand new that a lot of organizations have not really thought of before. But the fact of the matter is that with a lot of Gen AI capabilities, there's no longer a segmentation between code and data, because now the data that you use as a prompt to get a response and use the capability is now being used as code to generate the output on the back end. And that's it's something that's taken some thinking about to wrap our heads around. And your ability to track your models and your data is going to be paramount to keeping you secure in this space. Now that's a lot to talk through just with the threat space, and I'm going to pivot now to talk about the risk response. This is another area that requires a little bit more agility in this new space, and we're gonna touch on that here as we kind of wrap up the talk. So what's new? We talked about this a little bit. The fact that the challenges for dealing with risk in the Gen AI space are very broad. Generative AI capabilities are extremely complex, and the tools, switches, buttons, and knobs that we could turn to help us manage, mitigate, and reason around this risk are bountiful, I guess one would say. And I would say that dealing with risk in the Gen AI space is mostly an adaptability problem. And you'll see kind of why I say that. So a few things here, that in the Gen AI space, there is a trade-off between utility and security. The ideal might be that you have a generative AI technology that is trained on your data, that is only using information that's relevant to your product, or that is extremely fine-tuned to your use case. But the fact of the matter is that If a capability is using your data and only exclusively your data, then your data is what might be leaked or exposed should a vulnerability be found in that capability. Whereas if you employ the use of a third-party technology that's trained on only external data, then you're leaving some space and a gap between your data and risk, right? So there is a trade-off there, and it's important to evaluate that trade-off continually. Another suggestion here is organizations, and we didn't see this with other technologies, but creating an AI review board. The reason why this is such an important step to take for an organization with the advent of these types of technologies, the generative AI technologies, is that generative AI technologies pose unique risks to things like legal issues. They pose legal issues. They pose issues of bias and ethics. And having a diverse cross-functional team to evaluate use cases and the risks to those aspects of your organization is something that a lot of teams I've seen have adopted it to great success, and I advocate for that as well. And I already talked about building capabilities on a small scale, and I will remind you to keep in mind that when you do this, although it's a great idea, keep that technical debt in check. And then the last two things I'll touch on here to kind of wrap up on this slide is CISA has actually unveiled, they have cybersecurity performance goals. These are ideal for small and medium-sized organizations to help organizations prioritize steps they could take to mitigate, to deal with risks imposed by any technology in their cybersecurity stack, much less generative AI technologies, but those have been evaluated for these new Gen AI technologies. And then finally, the NIST AI risk management framework. I talked generally about risk management frameworks earlier. The NIST AI risk management framework is a tried and true process with just a few differences between more traditional risk management frameworks and something that's AI focused. And I'll just run through those really quick just to give you an idea. There's new guidance in here for harmful bias in AI systems. I talked about that just a second ago. This is brand new to generative AI technologies. And these new security concerns related to machine learning attacks. So some of these attacks or vulnerabilities have kind of been around even for machine learning tools, not just the generative AI tools. And this is the first, I believe, the first actual treatment of those security concerns in a risk management framework, published by NIST, I mean. And then the complexity of the attack surface of AI systems has a specific treatment in the AI risk management framework, as well as there is a specific treatment for third-party risk. And all of these things taken together is something that that the NIST AI risk management framework presents, that organizations should consider adopting, that makes it a little bit different from traditional risk management frameworks. And your ability to look at this risk management framework and pivot from one version of an RMF, a risk management framework, to something like an AI risk management framework is a hallmark of good organizational adaptability. And that's why I mention it on this slide, that as these new risk management frameworks and controls pop out, your ability to evaluate and adapt and adopt these risk management frameworks into your own risk processes is a really good sign of organizational adaptability. So that's, I definitely wanted to make sure that I mentioned both the cybersecurity performance goals and the risk management framework there. And so now I've talked about a lot of different things, hopefully some concrete steps that we can take in order to help us better manage risk and securely and confidently deploy these AI technologies. And I know that AI makes us uncomfortable, but we can do it. We've returned to places where we find comfort, these risk management frameworks, returning to what we know. But I acknowledge that this is not without challenge. And how we're going to overcome these challenges is just like I was saying. This is one piece of how we're going to do it, right? That we have we have to have a healthy culture of risk management in our organization anyway. That's first and foremost. We have to ask if we already have a business appropriate risk appetite as we continue to evaluate technologies just like this one. And then our ability to use data to its benefit and our benefit. Can we use and manage this new data and engineer new data pipelines quickly and securely? That's going to really be key to using these technologies confidently and securely. Finally, the organizational adaptability. I talked about that. Asking if you can adopt a new risk management framework or pivot on a relevant time scale. Are you going to be able to use it quickly and in a way that makes sense for your organization? And all of this together is actually going to come together to give us confident and secure use of emergent technologies, these very quickly evolving technologies as they change, as they evolve over time. And so with that, I will wrap up. It's been a really great pleasure being here for the Qualys Cyber Risk series talking about securing AI. I hope that you found even just a little bit of my talk comforting and rewarding. And if you do have any follow-up questions or want to give me feedback or want to know more about the work that we do at the SCI, please feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, I will turn it back over to you guys.